Good afternoon, Kalispera. Welcome to the breakout session for the Microfinance Best Practices. My name is John Savekis. I'm an investment officer with the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. And we're going to cover the subject that I think is very topical. It's received a lot of attention over the past few years from investors and philanthropists alike. So this is, at its most basic level, this topic is about microfinance is really about providing small loans to self-employed entrepreneurs in pursuit of income-producing opportunities. Very basic concept. This activity, in one form or another, has been taking place since ancient times. However, in a modern application of the term, we really only need to go back to the mid-1970s and a professor in Bangladesh. In 1976, Dr. Muhammad Yunus launched a research project to examine the delivery of banking services to the rural poor in Bangladesh. The project was called the Grameen Project, since Grameen means rural or village in the local language. After 30 years of quiet but successful work, the Grameen Bank and Dr. Yunus received the the Nobel Peace Prize, and drew a lot of well-deserved attention to this industry and to this sector. However, with any attention often comes a lot of money and funding, which was much needed, but also forced the industry to experience a rapid level of growth that it wasn't necessarily well equipped to do. As the old saying goes, give someone a fish, feed him for a day, teach someone to fish, feed them for a lifetime. And I think it's this basic intuitive concept that makes microfinance so appealing. But I think it's an idea that I think myself being a skeptic want to examine a little bit closely, a little more closely, and really understand if this is really follows through and is there is proof of concept in this. I think what is interesting is that the idea of giving someone access to capital who wouldn't otherwise have it to sustain themselves is in and of himself very appealing. Furthermore, the idea of receiving this money back so that it can be applied to someone else in need is also very appealing, not to mention that there is the promise of some kind of nominal financial return, which I think makes it, again, interesting to both philanthropic and commercially minded individuals. So this is apparent win-win, but a lot of questions have been raised about the sector, and really under whether the philanthropic and commercial aspects of this sector really are maximized, or, as was discussed earlier, is it best to keep those practices separate and distinct? I mean, an example is if a poor person is extended a loan, they have to earn a return, often in excess of 50%, to repay the loan plus interest. And that's a challenging endeavor for a poor person to do, particularly in a challenged economy. Further, the capital that's applied to microfinance is foregoing more market-based returns, which, as was discussed earlier, with these more market-based returns, that enhanced return can then be applied to more pure philanthropic interests. So I think what really needs to be looked at is the balance of the two, not to mention a very complex issue of the ethics of actually lending money to the poor and people that really need it. So I really think this is something that is makes this a very interesting topic. I'm approaching this with as open mind as possible, and we have a large group of moderators here, of speakers here who are going to be able to address this and really dig into this in a level. And some of the questions that I know I myself have, you might have, and what I hope that we can get out of this is, what is microfinance? Who does microfinance serve? What are the goals of microfinance? What are the operational and ethical challenges of microfinance? Has microfinance proven to be effective at alleviating poverty? Is the model sustainable? Is it scalable? Are the socioeconomic returns reliably measured? And how do these returns compare? Do they compare to, again, more traditional forms of investment and philanthropy? And further, and very part and parcel of this whole event that we're having here is what role does government, investors, and philanthropic organizations have to help microfinance live up to its billing? Like I said, fortunately, we do have a series of guest speakers here who can address this, and I hope that you will each join me at the end of their presentations to delve into this and really try to understand what is the true meaning of this concept. Joining me today is Donella Rapier, the Chief Development Administrative Officer of Accion. This is one of the leading and most respected microfinance organization in the world whose experience spans the globe. Also joining me is Maria Nowak, who is the founder and president of Adie, the organization that first introduced microfinance to France and really has become the model that has been applied across many parts of Europe. To her right is Clara Gaztelu, the Development and Unit Director of the ONCE Foundation, an organization that promotes social inclusion and entrepreneurship for individuals with disabilities. And this organization has roots that date back all the way to the late 1930s. And last but not least is Dr. Suresh Sundaresan, the Chase Manhattan Bank Professor for Economics and Finance at Columbia University. When Dr. Sundaresan isn't writing academic papers on derivatives risk and default risk and its effect on asset pricing, he's conducting research with the Center for Microfinance in India, and also examining, very interestingly, the securitization of microloans for sale to a more traditional institutional investor. So what we'll do is, as I mentioned, we'll go on to the speaker presentations. Afterwards, I'm going to ask a series of questions, and then hopefully open it up to a series of questions, and by the end, we'll have a lively dialogue. So with that, I turn it over to Donella.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to be representing Accion at this conference, and really a pleasure to be here with my co-panelists. I'm actually very eager to hear their presentations as well. So as John said, Accion is one of the largest and broadest microfinance networks in the world today. We were one of the very early pioneers, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Accion in the context of microfinance in general. So I'm going to talk a lot about what microfinance is, but it's hard to do that without also describing Accion, which, as with Grameen and a number of other experiments that were happening at the time, grew up all around, starting in the 1970s. So we are a global nonprofit. Our mission is to give people the financial tools that they need to improve their lives. Our vision is to build a financially inclusive world so that everyone has access to economic opportunity. Over our 52-year history, we've helped build 63 microfinance institutions in 32 countries on 4 continents. And those institutions are currently reaching millions of clients. We have Microfinance Institute, I'm going to use the shorthand MFI, it's for its Microfinance Institution. We have MFI partners basically all over Latin America, 4 countries in Africa, India, China, the Philippines, and we also have the largest network in the United States. So you might ask, well, what exactly is microfinance? Well, microfinance is providing financial services to people living in poverty or people who are excluded from our financial systems, who lack any access, and it provides a really powerful set of tools that can create economic opportunity so that they have the chance to move up the economic ladder. A couple of stories that I'll tell you. One is our favorite story because it illustrates so well the impact that this can have. So there was a woman in Manaus in Brazil, which is in a very remote part of Brazil at the start of the rainforest. And she used to spend half of her day traveling to the market in order to buy material to then make one dress, which she would then sell later on in the day. With a tiny loan of $300, she actually was able to buy enough material to make dresses for an entire week. So she literally doubled her productivity every single day except that one day that she now went to the market. And then from that, she built a very thriving business where she now actually employs people all over her neighborhood. And she buys material for all of them. And so she's created a whole virtuous cycle of employment and helping the families in this area. Another one, a gentleman that I met with who was a brand new loan client out in the slums that ring Bogota. He had a milk delivery business and had a series of 8 farmers up in the hills who he would go collect the milk from every morning and would put it in a big refrigerator and then would distribute it into his area, something that everybody desired every morning. And he needed a loan for another refrigerator and also to get a new car because his car was very old. And when you think about this, there is absolutely no way that he would ever be able to save enough money in advance in order to buy something like this. So, again, with 2 refrigerators and a new car, he was able to just, really completely improve and expand rapidly enough to be able to repay the loan and the interest. So it can really have a powerful impact even though the dollars are very small. I would say about in the United States, a lot of what we do is we loan to people who are excluded because there's no information about them. So they may be immigrants, they may be people of color, they may be starting businesses that most banks don't like to loan to, like the food and beverage industry. There are, and in different areas, but they can actually create thriving communities. So financial inclusion is the broader suite of that microfinance is a part of. It's how we define it. It's the availability of this full suite of financial services, including credit, savings, which is very important, insurance, and payments. A lot of people say, gee, aren't the poor too poor to save? Actually, they do save in very unique ways in things like livestock and other things like that because they have needs just like the rest of us do. And they're actually, if they're able to save money safely, this can really reduce their vulnerability. So savings is very important. Insurance, same way. So provided with quality in a convenient and affordable and suitable manner to everyone who can use the services and delivered in a diverse and competitive marketplace. We're actually big fans of competition because it helps improve efficiencies and then also brings interest rates down. So what problem are we trying to solve? Well, if you look at microfinance today, because since the 70s when microfinance first began, it really, especially over the last 20 years, microfinance has grown enormously, and it's now reaching about 200 million people. But as impressive as that seems, there's still 2.5 billion people that don't have access to any financial services at all. Then also, when you look at the microfinance institutions today, there are about 10,000 of them around the world, but only about 400 are self-sustainable, and less than 100 of those institutions are reaching more than 80% of the world's clients. So there's still a tremendous amount of work that we have to do. A lot of people think, oh, microfinance is a mature industry now, and in some ways it is, but in many ways it has a very, very long way yet to go. So our approach is to really reduce the vulnerability by increasing opportunity through providing financial services to the world's entrepreneurial poor. We don't actually serve the very poorest of the poor because they often aren't able to take advantage of banking services, and we do provide financial education to ones that are, but to the hardworking poor is really the segment that we serve. Now, there was a lot of conversation about this morning about pure philanthropy versus impact investing, and I know there are strong views on all different sides of this question. We do focus on a double bottom line. We do think that we can pursue altruistic goals through commercial means, and our goal is to maximize both the social and economic returns. We build permanent, sustainable institutions and that are commercially viable. So it's an unusual position. We are a not-for-profit, but we invest in for-profit banks. So to reach the billions of excluded people, we really believe that we needed to harness the full force of the capital markets, recognizing that all the philanthropy in the entire world isn't going to be sufficient to really develop economies. So we feel that it's very important to bring all of these things to the problem, and that means engaging third-party investors, providing a return on capital, and then making exits available for investors in due course. And essentially what we do is we will start with we call them, tier 2 or tier 3, maybe a unprofitable or marginally profitable microfinance institution, maybe still formed as a not-for-profit. And what we'll do is we'll, through technical assistance and support, investing in them and sitting on their boards of directors, will really bring them to be a tier 1 leader in their region. So that's very much our approach. And as they become leaders, we can gradually then back out. They become self-sustaining for the long term. So we have 3 strategic priorities. One is building the next generation of top-tier MFIs, pushing beyond microfinance. This is our impact investment initiatives where we invest in very promising new companies that are serving the base of the pyramid, all focused around financial services, access to financial services, unique new savings products, insurance, and then we house the Center for Financial Inclusion down in Washington, D.C., and that's really helping to build an industry with very strong standards. So I'm just going to leave off with 2 final thoughts here. The potential of microfinance, I mean, it's really, we really believe it's a unique way of harnessing the best of the business world to help solve some of the world's most challenging social problems. It's matured, as I mentioned, and it's widely recognized as a really important tool, but there are still 2.5 billion people out there who don't have access to financial services. Technology is creating a sea change. The mobile phones that everyone has, even at the base of the pyramid, makes a significant difference in helping to lower the costs and helping to expand outreach, particularly into rural communities. And we really, when I looked at the focus of this conference, I said, this is us, because really we think that all 3 of these vectors need to come together. Donor funding is really critical for the high-risk early intervention where, businesses are just not going to invest. And then at the moment of demonstrated commercial viability, the capital markets need to come in to really bring real full scale once the concepts are proven. And we have found increasingly the importance of the state's role because we need favorable regulatory environments and clients need to be well protected. So we need to make sure that the state is providing appropriate protection for the clients and appropriate controls while not choking off the industry, which it can have the possibility to do if it's too strong. So with that, I would like to say thank you, and I will be delighted to pass it on to the next presenter, and we'll be happy to answer any questions during the Q&A.
Thank you. Maria?
To do. I think I stand up because I want to see you.
Do you want to sit here?
Oh, all right, sit here, yes.
Yeah,
I have to change. Well, I will present mainly microfinance in Europe. I started my experience as regards microfinance in Africa and other developing countries, but I introduced it in Europe in 1989. And of course, it's a very different experience than developing countries. First of all, sort of historical perspective. I believe that development of capitalism created a sort of gulf between the economy and the social sector managed by the state, the welfare state, and that this gulf is one of the major causes of social exclusion for people who are assisted by the state and even for those who are not assisted. One of the solutions is to bring back together labor and capital. You all remember, this is the first thing you learn in economics, that to create wealth we need both. Microcredit provides precisely an opportunity to socially excluded people to re-enter the productive sector by creating their own jobs. Here you see how the system works. The welfare state, as it has been introduced in Europe at the end of the 19th century and developed after the Second World War, takes care of those excluded from the market economy. And these people live on welfare. What is not, well, what is better, of course, that I don't have any other resources, but what is very difficult for people who are able to work. I'm not talking, of course, about people who are old or young or too young or sick or whatever. Now, if these excluded people have access to capital through microcredit, they can participate directly in the creation of wealth. And of course, welfare is still used for people who cannot work, but you have a much more active employment policy, and you have people who recover their dignity simply because they are working and they are considered as citizens like all the others. I will say a few words about Adie. Adie means Association pour le droit à l'initiative économique, Association for the Right to Economic Initiative, which is in fact the whole program. Our mission is to provide financial and business development services to unemployed people who are social aid beneficiaries, and to do advocacy for improving legal and institutional framework. Why we need to improve this legal framework? Because it has been set up for an economy based on large enterprises, on wage labor, on the welfare state. And in fact, there is not much place for self-employment, for micro-entrepreneurs. In Europe, each country considers it's an industrial country, which is not quite true, and less true, in fact, since 30 years, when the part of services increased and the part of industry decreased because of globalization. We provide financial services, loans, quasi-equity loans at 0%, which are subordinated to the normal loans, microinsurance, business development services. And we are a sort of example of social market economy, since we partner with the government, with the local governments, with the private sector, with foundations, with individuals. We have more than 1,000 volunteers who help in business development services. And all are convinced that normal citizens should have right to create, to work, rather than be simply assisted. So at this stage, the banks provide us loan funds, after we have changed the banking law, of course, and other institutions provide us funds for providing all sorts of training, business assistance, coaching, and so on. Our target population is really at the bottom of the pyramid. We have about 1/4 of the population, people with very low education level, 4% illiterate, 20% can hardly read and write. They are still good entrepreneurs in a different way. Of course, they are self-employed. They want to create SMEs, but they are good entrepreneurs. And we have more than 20% of people who have a university degree. And of course, the main part of activities they create is services and trade, because these are the easiest to set up in our countries. But there are also people who work in the sector of construction, restaurants, well, usually, in fact, sort of quick food or street food, sector of craft, agriculture, transport, and so on. A few statistics. Besides professional loans for creation or development of an enterprise, we have also personal loans for people who need some financial means to buy a motor or repair their car in order to find more easily a new job. We have more than 30,000 active clients, what seems ridiculous if you compare it to Grameen Bank, 5 million people. But what is quite a lot, it's in fact the maximum in Europe, well, because of this very specific situation where in fact our economy is still defined as an industrial economy, and in fact it is evolving very rapidly to a new sort of economy based on services and based on new technologies. The default rate has increased a bit with the crisis. The loss rate still is very low, around a bit more than 2%. Thanks to business development services, we could help the creation of more than 80,000 new enterprises still created by this specific target population, with a survival rate which is exactly the same than the average in France, and an inclusion rate, meaning people coming out of the welfare system, close to 80%. You see here the curve of production of professional loans, and of course you will see that the crisis in fact hurt our clients, because well, the whole economy in France and in Europe was hurt, and poor people were of course the most hurt. It's now increasing again. Here is the network. In fact, we covered the whole French territory with 120 branches, 246 contact points. We cover also, well, all these islands which are part of French territories. And I think that the main figure you should remain is that Adie creates 200 jobs per week which is quite significant in the present situation where unemployment is pretty high. And what is also very important to say is that presently in France, but I think that it's more or less the same here and elsewhere, majority of new jobs are created through creation of enterprises. We have in France more or less 100 jobs destroyed last year and more than 500,000 new enterprises created. So this is the future, and we are sort of rebuilding a new type of economy. Now, a few words about Greece. In fact, I was invited to come here on mission by the European Commission Task Force, and at the request of the central bank to help to introduce microcredit in Greece, what of course is a difficult task. Only 2 countries at this stage have no microcredit institution. It's Denmark and Greece. In Greece, the reason is that to create a financial institution, you need a very high initial capital. And besides this fact, you know also that the whole banking sector in this very bad situation. It's in process of restructuring, and in the banking sector, credit risk is about 50%, which is extremely high. Other obstacles are, of course, the level of demand, which is low because of the crisis, because of unemployment. And this was the most strange for me, sort of flow of subsidies, which has destroyed, in fact, normal functioning of the market economy, because during the last years, people get used to subsidies and forgot, in a way, about credit. Another and important point, which we have also in France, is that it seems almost impossible to have an interest rate of more than 10%. And this is, of course, extremely difficult to make an institution sustainable, because with 10% you cannot cover the cost. At the same time, the crisis, as somebody said already this morning, is an opportunity. There are new markets emerging in agriculture and production of essential goods. Usually, microcredit finances services. Here, it's not the case, because it was you had already a number of micro-enterprises and self-employed who produce these services, and they are decreasing because of the crisis. But as you know, many of urban inhabitants leave now for rural areas and try to restart some sort of activity there. So it's quite a new market. The rate of unemployment explodes, and of course, this is, I can say, an opportunity, but at least a good reason to develop any other form of employment. And people need to have projects to restore hope and trust, which are the basic factors of any sort of economic growth and social cohesion. There is potential funding from the European structural funds, but here again a problem. It needs a lot of time to be mobilized. whatever bridging this sort of financial gap could be a challenge into alternative model of social market welfare based on collaboration between state, market, and philanthropy. Last slide, well, impact of microcredit on social inclusion. It contributes to growth, creating jobs, increasing demand, reducing the burden of unemployment of the economy. You see, the whole argument is quite different of the one in developing countries. The situation is different. Microcredit improves social cohesion, integration of vulnerable groups, of ethnic minorities, and here again you have more and more immigrants into center of the town. It develops human capital by providing self-confidence and entrepreneurship. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clara. That was, like I said, a virtual encyclopedia of microfinance and on-the-ground experiences, and that's actually, I think, sets up very well Clara and the role that the UNCE Foundation does in Spain.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I want to thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to be here. I am going to first explain what the UNCE Foundation, the organization I represent, does and what it is. The UNCE Foundation for the Cooperation and Social Inclusion for People with Disabilities was founded in 1988. By the agreement of UNCE, and UNCE is the National Organization for the Blind, which dates back to 1938. This year is the 75th anniversary of UNCE and our 25th anniversary of the foundation. UNCE is a public law corporation that has the financing singularity that does its financing through the sales of lottery and license of other types of games that are authorized by the government. This lottery is sold by people with disabilities, and through the economic resources that come from the lottery, it finances a wide system of social services for the blind or visually impaired people, but also this allows to employ over 123,000 people in Spain. This is together with UNCE, the organization, UNCE Foundation, and two holding groups that UNCE and UNCE Foundation have that are called Fundación Grupo and CEOSA. They're actually holding groups that employ people with disabilities, where more than 70% of the people that work in those companies are people with disabilities. This is the largest employer in Spain, and it's a unique self-organizing model. The UNCE Foundation has as main goal the full inclusion in society and the improvement of quality of life of people with disabilities, and we do this through the participation in the labor market and the promotion of universal accessibility in the broad sense, promoting universally accessible environments, products, and services. 3% of our foundation's budget comes from the lottery sales. And over the last 20 years, the UNCE Foundation has created more than 67,500 job placements and more than 10,000 training courses. In 2012, for example, we have created more than 5,500 new jobs for people with disabilities in the situation that you know how things are going in Spain. We're still creating employment, something we're very proud of. And we have provided more than 10,000 training courses. So from the two main axes, training and employment and accessibility, I'm going to focus briefly on the training and employment. We are committed on creating an inclusive job market for this sector of the population in high risk of exclusion. And how do we do this? We do this through the companies, as I mentioned before. The holding group for UNCE Foundation is Fundación Grupo, so through our companies, through providing financial support to third-party projects. We have intervention in the regular employment market by helping people find a job and providing financial support and also facilitating self-employment to entrepreneurs. This is the program I'm going to talk about now a bit in more depth. Well, the activity rate of people with disabilities in Spain, that means the percentage of people that are in working age and that actually have a job in Spain is only 36.6%. That means 40 points beneath the activity rate of the rest of the population, which shows the risk of exclusion of these sector of the population. What are some of the factors? Well, in many cases it's society's fear. When we talk to employers, sometimes they don't hire a person with a disability just because of the unknown, the fear of the unknown, right? They think they're not going to be able to be as productive, and in many cases they just need a small adaptation of the position, for example. We operate in a competitive labor market. There's increasing unemployment rate in Spain. It's going up and higher. It's amazing. And the lack of professional training of people with disabilities also is a barrier. This is why we combine training to have access to employment. And in some cases, of course, some types of disabilities will have special needs, or they need for example, flexibility with a working schedule or other types of adaptations, and this also difficulties their access. So we have this self-employment program to promote entrepreneurship among people with disabilities. It's co-funded by the European Union Social Fund. What we do is we help them launch their micro-enterprise or business. And we do this combining the financial aid to launch the business and mentoring. So what we do is we provide them the necessary skill building throughout the whole process, before launching the business, while they're launching, throughout the whole process. How we do this, it's the process starts with an interview. There they design what they call a personalized itinerary plan for insertion, and this is the basis that will help the person throughout the process. They have access to different workshops. We provide them with workshops for creativity, self-employment, and to design their business plan. And these are complementary of each other. So what they do is they generate and analyze business ideas, they define the project, and they actually do a business plan, and they do a feasibility diagnosis. With this whole package on top of the workshops, they can receive technical assistance and consulting and monitoring to help them actually launch their business. And if they meet certain criteria, they can receive financial aid. This is, in this case, it's not a loan, it's a grant, but still we provide them with up to 50% of the cost of launching the business, with a maximum of 18,000 euros. And we have seen that the combination of the training they receive, the technical assistance, and the aid, this is key for the success of the projects, of the business. What are the criteria we use to select? Well, 55, this is like a scoring criteria, so 55% of the score comes from the business project viability, where we value the entrepreneur's creditworthiness, and then the project's economic sustainability over time. If they meet a certain number of points in this area, then we can add other points depending on some criteria. So, for example, we want to promote certain types of disability. So if the people that apply have a disability over 65%, have intellectual, mental disability, for example, if they are women with a disability or long-term unemployed, if they're creating more than one job for the business they're launching, or if they're launching them in rural areas, or they're using new technologies, or if they're underneath 30 years old or over 45, well, they get, we do positive discrimination. So for us, it's important to promote this types of entrepreneurs. Well, some of the results of our program, even though we've had it since longer, the last 3 years, well, from 2010 to 2012, we launched 224 projects. We gave away financial aid over 2 million euros. The average aid per project or business launch was over 9,000 euros. And what we have seen is that there has been an increase of 34% in the number of applications we received since 2010, and we promoted a 50% increase of business projects. Well, as I said before, I think from ONCE Foundation's experience, we have seen that self-employment is in many cases the only solution for many people with disabilities, and we have seen that limited economic resources are the main reason for the non-sustainability of the business project. So that's in many cases why the business doesn't continue over time, when they don't, the lack of economic resources. We have over a 90% success rate of businesses that last over 2 years. We're going to analyze, I think in the next year, what are the results over a period of 5 years? I don't have the data yet. And while there's an increase in social needs in the population in Spain in general, but in the case of people with disabilities, it's even more. And we know that the lack of access to credit is one of the main obstacles for the creation of businesses. We are convinced that philanthropy has a critical role to contribute to social inclusion of disadvantaged groups. And thank you very much. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Clara. I think now we'll move on to Suresh.
Okay, first of all, let me begin by thanking the organizers of this conference and the Foundation for inviting me. And the panel members have already given a very practical and pragmatic overview of some of the things that they're doing on the ground. And John sort of laid out some broad issues at the commencement of this session. So my comparative advantage is to try to give you a little bit of a perspective before I delve into microfinance. So I'm going to first talk a little bit about, how do we think about poverty, how do we measure poverty. And I think implicit in a lot of the earlier presentation is this underlying notion that there's a very large segment of the world that is poor. So how do we measure who is poor? Well, World Bank has come up with this idea, $1 a day, a magical number, or $2 a day. And we look at, the numbers, they're staggering, 1.5 billion. But we made significant progress. If you look at what has happened to the poverty measure, $1 a day between 1981 and 2008, that has really gone down quite dramatically, 50%. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the driver? What is driving this? And of course, if you were to set the measure a little bit more ambitiously and say, well, I'm going to conclude that anybody who is living at a $2 a day is poor. Well, the number is about 2.5 billion, very much the number that Donella, for example, presented in her talk. So that has also dropped, but not as much. But if you look where the poverty is concentrated, it's South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia Pacific. That's where these poor are concentrated. Now, if you were to look at what happened between 1981 and 2008 that led to this dramatic reduction in poverty, well, that is the economic growth. that actually was the principal driver. And this sort of cuts to the question that John was posing at the very beginning, what's the role of the state? I think the role of the state is to make sure that the economies are growing very rapidly, and that's the best way for us to reduce poverty. And as the economies grow, the opportunities for entrepreneurs will go up. And as Mary was pointing out, after the 2008 crisis, things fell off a little bit because the economies were not growing. So I think state has a very important role to play in terms of making sure that the economies grow, at a reasonable rate. Now, the other part that we often focus on in microfinance is the interest rate. Mary talked about 10% ceiling. That can be a very harmful thing to do. But what should be the appropriate interest rates that we should be charging on microloans? Well, that again depends on the state. If you look at Brazil, inflation rate ran in thousands of percentages just a couple of decades ago, right? So if inflation is so high, you can't really put a cap on interest rate because, expected inflation is going to be part of the interest cost. There isn't much you could do as a microfinance institution to contain the cost of delivering the loans. So I think state has another important role to play, which is to provide a macroeconomic environment where the interest rates are reasonably low, so that microfinance institutions can reasonably provide loans and access to capital at rates that are, meaningful for microfinance borrowers. Okay, now I have a minor complaint about the Millennium Development Goals. So we all agree that the goals that have been set for 2015 are absolutely on the money, right? None of us will want to remove any of these goals. But what is missing here is access to capital. That is somehow not part of the Millennium Development Goals. If you really reflect on this, you can't get access to health, you can't get access to education if you don't have access to capital. So in some sense, access to capital is just as basic as access to some of the other services that we have recognized as part of the Millennium Development Goal. Okay, with this sort of a backdrop, I want to go into the proper microfinance domain, and I think even though some of us sort of refer to microfinance as microcredit and so forth, we all recognize that the needs of the poor are multifarious. Why is that? Incomes are very low, and oftentimes we measure average income to be $1 a day or $2 a day. But remember, they're averages. That means there are months where the family may not get anything, and there are months in which the family may be making $5 or $6 a day. What does that mean? They have to save for the rainy day, and they have to borrow, right? So they need services for savings, they need services for borrowing. So we talk about microcredit, we talk about micro savings. Incomes are irregular, incomes are unpredictable. A bad monsoon, a drought, an earthquake, any kind of catastrophe, these are folks who live on the edge, therefore they need microinsurance. Okay, so you can see that a broad range of financial services are in fact more direly needed by this segment of the society than you and I, who take some of these services for granted. Now, I should also sort of comment that, and I'll give you some evidence on this a bit later, that these families which live under $1 a day often have one breadwinner. That could be a migrant worker who may be working hundreds of miles away from home. So one of the essential services would be reliable, low-cost transfer of money. They have to, the breadwinner has to transfer the money over to the family that's living in the village. So that's part of financial services as well. So when we talk about microfinance, it's not just microcredit. It's a whole range, a broad range of services that you and I take for granted. Okay, so several of the panel members talked about, microcredit to help the entrepreneurs, right? So, but if you look at the broad range of people living under poverty, entrepreneurs are a significant proportion of the poor, but they are not the biggest, right? You notice that there are folks, the smallhold farmers, right? They're actually much bigger than entrepreneurs. So if you look at the range of services that we're going to be looking at, it covers everything that we talked about: savings, insurance, money transfer, credit, and so forth. So who are providing all these services? Local money lenders are still very active in South Asia. They're still very active in parts of Philippines and other areas. Very old ways of getting together and making sure that individuals insure each other, like Roscars, chit funds. They are all very common in many parts of the world. What does that mean? It means that despite the advancing, maturing nature of microfinance, it has not really percolated down to improve the way in which financial arrangements are being worked out by the poor. So that represents a fairly major opportunity, because if you look at the interest rates that chit funds and Roscars charge, they're very significant compared to some of the interest rates that we have seen with microfinance institutions. Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the interest rates. So I looked at the data as of 2011. You notice that banks charge about 26%, credit unions 21%, non-bank financial institutions 32%, NGOs 31%. This is just broad average. If you were to go to Latin America, the interest rates are going to be much higher. If you were to go to South Asia, interest rates will be a little bit lower. So you ask yourself, if you were a poor woman borrowing at something like 30% interest rate, right? How many years would it take for you at that rate of borrowing to reach $1 a day or break the barrier of poverty? $1 a day or $2 a day. Actually, I go through these calculations with my students at Columbia, and I thought it's a very useful exercise because it sort of gives us a perspective on what should we be aiming in microfinance. So this is again a sense that the cost of interest rates are very high. I'm not suggesting that microfinance institutions are making money, right? They need to charge these kinds of interest rates to just break even, right? Because the cost of delivering the loans and financial services to geographically disparate population is very high. And the underlying cost of borrowing can be very high because the inflation is high, right? So the real rates could be very high. These are completely outside the control of microfinance institutions. So let's keep that in mind. And, let's take a look at this exercise. Imagine that there is a 25-year-old woman borrowing $200 at 25% per annum, which is a very typical interest rates. I presented you this. She has a joint liability contract. She's borrowing with 10 other women. That means if she were to default, the other 9 women are responsible for paying back the loan. That's what joint liability means. And every time the group repays the loan, let's assume that the loan gets doubled. And let's assume that her return on capital is 50%, okay? Which is not unusual. If you're borrowing small amounts, the marginal returns can be quite high. How many years would it take for her to break the poverty barrier? Well, you can go through the calculation at 25%. It takes about 8 years. Okay? If you were to cut this interest rate from 25% to 15%, by the way, the top, it should be 15, not 25, you can actually bring down the number of years by about 2 years. Okay, so what I'm pointing out here is that we should focus, when we think about microfinance, on what are the ways in which we can actually bring down the interest rates and still keep the microfinance institutions viable and self-sustaining. Okay, so how can we accomplish that? Well, scaling, this is something that came up in earlier discussions in our panel. Scaling is going to be quite important. This graph tells you all the microfinance institutions in Brazil, and they got the operating costs on the y-axis, size of the microfinance institution along the y-axis, and what do we see here? Bigger institutions are able to deliver the services at a lower cost. So there is scaling that brings down, dramatically the cost of delivering financial services to the poor. Now, is that possible? What are the kinds of opportunities that exist out there? And this is where I think the technology holds a tremendous promise for scaling up and bringing down the cost of delivering financial services. Because if you look at the developing world, that's where the mobile phones are making much bigger inroads. The mobile phone market is much bigger in emerging markets compared to developing markets. With mobile phone, you can actually do a money transfer as low as $5 from one point to another point at a very negligible cost. Which this actually means that you're able to start delivering some of the financial services at a dramatically lower cost of delivery, potentially lowering the cost of delivering the financial services. This data comes from World Bank. And if you look at what is the percentage of the population that has mobile phones and what percentage of the population has access to financial services, there's a huge gap here. So this gap represents a tremendous opportunity to provide financial services at a relatively low cost. So here is a cost comparison. Conventional ways of setting up a brick and mortar branch in a village. What would it cost you to deliver financial services? What would it cost you to deliver the financial services through mobile phone? You can see the graph sort of is self-explanatory. At a fraction of the cost, we can deliver the same financial services. Now, if you look at some of the countries like Kenya or India, right now there are technologies that are being put to use for I can make a deposit, I can take a loan, I can transfer money, I can buy insurance, all through mobile phones in Kenya. Okay, there is M-Pesa, there is M-Shwari. These are functioning organizations that are able to accomplish all this. The same thing is true in India. But of course, the state has a very big role to play, because should mobile companies be given banking license? Because they are the ones who are able to deliver these things, right? So what should be the manner in which the central banks deal with Vodafones and other companies that are able to deliver financial services? So let me sort of sum up with my take on some of the best practices, which is what John wanted me to sort of focus on. I think the state has a big role to play in terms of keeping up the economic growth, maintaining the inflation rate to be sufficiently low so that the interest rates are manageable. State has a big role to play in terms of making sure that the regulation is not too onerous, the know your customer rules are manageable, and it protects the client, as Donella was pointing out. Now, from the perspective of microfinance institution, the focus should be not just on microloans, it should be on a variety of different financial services, which is already the case with many of the microfinance institutions. And of course, technology is here to stay, and developing world is seeing a leapfrogging of the technology. In fact, in Kenya, I can actually transfer $1 from mobile phone to someone else's mobile phone. I couldn't do it in Manhattan. Okay, this tells you the kind of the leapfrogging of the technology that has occurred in developing world. And I think another area where state can be very useful is setting up credit bureaus, because that makes sure that people who are already indebted do not get into a poverty trap by borrowing from multiple sources of financial services. Let me stop here. I'll be glad to take questions later.
Well, thank you to all the panelists. This has been, hope as enlightening to you as it has been for me. One thing, anyone that knows me knows I'm a blunt instrument, so I'll just come right out with it. I can understand the access to financial services is important. I get that. The ability for these microloans to be managed in both a developing and developed market. That I understand. There's obviously good rigorous processes that have been put in place to ensure the success and ultimately sustainability of these projects. But it seems to me this is really more of a question for the first two sectors, the state and perhaps the commercial sector. But what I'm not quite clear on is the role that philanthropy plays directly in microfinance, as opposed to perhaps a secondary support system, or perhaps just something that's running parallel to microfinance more directly, and again in a more traditional philanthropy environment. So I'll pose that broadly to the panel. If anyone would like to jump in immediately, and then anyone else would like to follow up with that, I'll leave it at that.
So the role of philanthropy in microfinance, I mean, without philanthropy, microfinance would not exist today. There was a report by Monitor that estimated that it's about $20 billion that went into microfinance philanthropically to get it to where it is today, to where we're at a point where still only 400 of the 10,000 microfinance institutions are self-sustaining institutions. So it's a critical, pivotal, it has been and continues to be able to reach the vast numbers of people who are still excluded. It also, I think, the philanthropy is really important in the impact investing world. I mentioned that Accion has also does impact investing beyond microfinance, still all geared towards financial services, but doing a lot of things like investing in technologies that are going to actually change the whole face of how financial services are delivered in the developing world and in the developed world as well. And even there, we find that the true impact investors are still looking at companies that are well too far along. So philanthropy is needed to support those that are brand new kinds of companies where there isn't a proven business model, and so that they can get to a point where they can actually prove it. So I think philanthropy is it is the differentiator between whether something happens or not. It's the thing that gets it started, and people have to believe and put money into it to get these things going, and then bridge it to a fully self-sustaining capital solution.
I just want to make sure I got your question right. John, are you saying that you can imagine, just a philanthropist just directly reaching out to the client instead of funding a microfinance institution? Is that what you're...
That's exactly right. And again, it touches on probably my next question, and I could probably also pose it now, because I think there's a very strong ethical question to be raised from a philanthropic standpoint. If I'm actually lending money to someone who's in need of it, whether in a developed or developing market, and particularly given the interest rates that are required to enable this enterprise to be self-sustaining, as a philanthropic standpoint, it just doesn't feel right, doesn't sit right, and that's what I'm just trying to understand. Where does philanthropy play? What role does philanthropy play? Or is it just, again, it's just a parallel system where we're supporting poverty alleviation through other means?
Okay. Let me take that question head on, because I think that's a very important question that John has proposed to the panel and all of us. I think if you were to go back and look at Grameen Bank's website, Grameen Bank very clearly states that charity is not a good way to proceed. The right way to proceed is to actually give a loan. And give all kinds of support in addition to giving the loan, right? Financial literacy, training, capacity building, a whole bunch of other things that go with it. And why is that distinction important? Because when a loan is given and the loan is repaid, there is a certain sense of empowerment. The women, they view themselves in a very different light. They view themselves as entrepreneurs, who are able to take a loan, do something, pay back the interest, right? So I think the whole incentive structure changes. So that's the first observation I would make. The second observation would be philanthropy is quite important in this because I think MFI brings a certain technical expertise that's very unique to them. For example, I'll give you the SKS, which is a fairly big microfinance institution. It started as an NGO, relied on philanthropic contributors, and then eventually it became a non-bank financial institution and successfully did an IPO of $1.2 billion. Now you step back and see, how does this thing play out? When the IPO was done, the borrowers were given shares. So that a fraction of the shares were held by the borrowers in trust so that the directors of the trust can help them and their families with financial literacy, education, healthcare, and so forth. So you can, and the unique expertise that I think MFI brings in is, for example, they developed this concept of joint liability. They developed this concept of weekly meetings where community knows each other's problem, they insure each other, they share the knowledge, and the idea of taking on an entrepreneurship and then being good at it, repaying. So I think these kinds of skills MFIs are able to bring to the table, and over a period of time, their accumulated knowledge of the credit history in a particular village can further help the community to get access to other financial services. For example, Grameen USA, after about a year of borrowing, they provide the credit history to their field partners and then open up other opportunities for their clients. So I would argue that they actually go together rather well.
Thank you, Maria. You look like you were dying to get in here.
Yes, I just would like, I fully agree with what you say. Just wanted to say a few other things. First, if you want to read theory about credit and ethics, Calvin should be your good book, because he wrote a lot of about the interest rate, and he explained that if you give to somebody who is in need, you should just give a grant. Mm-hmm. But if you provide money to somebody who is creating any sort of project which produces a revenue, it's normal that you share afterwards this revenue with the guy who has created it. And it's not a new question, we during the reform period, it was the main subject, what to do with lending, what to do with interest rate, if you should or not have it. And I think honestly that it's not possible to envisage really helping people to get out of poverty just with grants. It's simply impossible. So I think that this is one of major arguments. The other one is what we checked in the field, the feeling of people who consider that when they receive a credit, it gives them back a sort of dignity. They are considered as people autonomous who have a good project and who can be treated like all the other citizens. And honestly, this is an extremely important issue, especially in Europe, where you have all this welfare system which makes people feel assisted.
Thank you. I guess another question that I have, and then I'll turn it over to the audience. It's really, I think, more about now measurement, and I'll look at it from two perspectives. One is the measurement of the likelihood of success of this proposed entrepreneur? What is necessary to prepare them? What is necessary to ensure that either you're going to earn a return, or in Clara's case, that the grant will be successful? And then on the other side is then measuring the social and financial impact, since this is a loan, and the ultimate goal is to be self-sustaining and actually earn some kind of economic return. How do you measure the combined social and economic return of a microfinance loan compared to, again, a more traditional financial investment and traditional philanthropy? So that's kind of another two-stage question. So perhaps we can just look at perhaps the process of making the loan itself for the entrepreneur, and then maybe the financial aspect.
So I think, again, I'm going to have a small complaint in the way in which you framed it, in the sense that you framed it as microloan. I think there are a lot of financial services, that are being delivered. Savings, credit, microinsurance, money transfer. So I think the broader question would be, what is the impact of the delivery of all these financial services as opposed to just microloan? Okay, so that's just a way of framing that
That's
question.
That's fair.
Minor complaint. But I take your point very well. I think slightly sort of tangentially addressing this point, this is a field where there is a gender bias, and women, by and large, are given the priority, and the bulk of the loans go to women. And it turns out a number of academic studies have been done, and what these studies have unambiguously shown is that the dollar loan that goes to a woman translates to much better educational attainment for the children and much better nutritional outcomes for the children. So clearly, if you want to think about impact, that's a very important impact, right? I mean, there is a manner in which credit is being channelized, and that seems to have a good outcome for the next generation in terms of health and education. So that I would say that's good. The second thing I would say is that it's sort of a soft measure, but nonetheless an important measure. I think the children look at the mother very differently. Because the mother is going out, she's an entrepreneur, she's bringing home income, and so that there's an empowerment that goes beyond a generation, and there have been some studies that have documented that, although anecdotally, there seems to be a good development as well. Now, the tough question is, which is what I think the meat of your question is, really what is the impact, on when a microloan is given? Do the recipients do significantly better than others who don't receive microloans, for example? And there have been a number of, randomized sampling where, you take a control group which is similar in every way to the group which is receiving the microloan, and then you track them over a period of time and then ask, has there been an impact? And the studies have come back with somewhat mixed results. There is not an ambiguous, statement that we could make that a microloan has resulted in better consumption per capita, or better disposable income, and so forth. But I think my own feeling on that is, this is probably not necessarily the only way to measure the impact. As I already stated, there are other measures that seem to suggest that this has had a good impact. I have not seen any studies that explicitly compare microfinance vis-a-vis philanthropic, alternatives. So I have nothing to say on that question.
And I would just add that the studies that are out there, first of all, it's very hard to determine causality. It's very hard to separate a control group and actually have it really function. that have that group not get loans from another organization. And then the studies have been very short term, I think, in order to, I mean, we all know that, changing people's lives takes time. I mean, social impact is a long-term thing, and most of the studies have been, 3 years or under, which is a little difficult to do in something like this in such a short amount of time. I'd also just say that if you believe that economic development is going to lift all boats, it's impossible to envision a thriving economy without a strong financial system. And the absence of any financial services to people living in poverty is a big failure of our world capital markets. So that is the other thing, is I think just on its face, that it's by creating a financially inclusive world, I think that the economic development will bring up levels of poverty all around the world.
Okay, with that, I think we'll open it up to the floor. Anyone?
Thank you. A double question. You mentioned that the interest rates are quite high, and they're usually covering the cost of an organization giving away these loans. Which percentage of, approximately, of this cost is the cost inherent to the organization, and which part is the cost of acquiring the money to pass it through? Because that might be the amount that goes to philanthropy, cutting the cost of the interest rate and making it more accessible. So this is number one. And number two is education and training featuring as a recipient, let's say, of the microfinancing? And because we all know that training and education is taking people much further in the sustainability of their businesses, and if not, why?
Two excellent questions. So I can break down the cost of microfinance institution into cost of funding. They basically, if you are an NGO, it could be donor funding. If you're a non-bank financial institution, you may be borrowing from a bank, and the bank is going to charge you something. Or if you're a big company like Bank Compartimos or SKS, you could go out and borrow money. So that cost is something that MFI doesn't have much control over. I think the state has to maintain low inflation, low cost to sort of make it reasonable. And then on top of that, you have a very big cost, and that is the operating cost. You have a large number of field agents who have to go and actually deliver the loan or financial services, have weekly meetings at the center. That's a very big chunk of the cost. And then you need to have some reserves for write-offs, potential defaults, delinquencies, and what have you, right? So you can sort of break it down that way. My understanding is that philanthropists or philanthropic organizations that give money to NGOs, the cost is very low. That doesn't mean, I think the bulk is really the operating cost. How do you bring it down so that if MFI is charging 30-35% interest rate, unless your business model allows you to sort of bring it down by 10%, let's say to 25%, the women who are borrowing are going to take 4 or 5 extra years to break through the poverty. That's the calculation that's pretty robust, I think. So I would say the scope there is through technology, through mobile phones and various other provisions, that actually comes down. One other point that I would make is on the training. A lot of the borrowers are illiterate. They are not able to, really, articulate their credit history and so forth. So now many countries have developed a universal ID, biometric cards, where you just have a thumb imprint, that's sufficient for you to carry your credit history, and mobile phones automatically catch all your transactions. So I think, quite aside from training, technology can pretty much protect the client from some of the issues that were quite important prior to the mobile phone. So.
Just want to add the situation in Europe. In Europe, very few institutions can reach the scale and can cover the costs for all sorts of reasons. The first one being the complexity of institutional and legal environment, which in fact requires a lot of changes in this legal system before you can get clients. Very often, for instance, we have people who ask us for a credit and we cannot grant this credit because the person has not the legal qualification to do such or such type of activity. And usually this rule is, this regulation doesn't make sense. Well, I want, for instance, in France, you have regulations for each type of sector. In sector cycles, to be auto mechanic, you need 2 years of training plus a diploma, what's okay for me, but you need exactly the same 2 years training plus a diploma if you want to repair bicycles. What doesn't make sense, because this we could certainly do. So there are all sorts of problems which are specific to our countries, which are due to a very complex business environment and a very complex legal system which is not really adapted to this type of credit. And not only credit, also this type of self-employment or enterprise creation. But I give you 3 figures. In France, microcredit, together with a very important business development service, training, coaching, all kind of advice, costs 1,500 euros per person. To compare with the cost of an unemployed, direct cost is 14,000 a year, 14,000. And if you add all sorts of indirect costs, such as loss of tax payment or social security fees, it's 30,000 a year. So, in fact, in all cases, it's worthwhile for the people first, because they become autonomous and they recover their dignity. For the state second, because in fact it's an economy for the state, and also for the future, because part of them create jobs. Our champion has created 600 jobs with a loan of 4,000 euros. I must say, not all can do that.
Thank you. Based on everything that's going on outside, I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Yes. My name is Papa Giorgio, and I'm running Bread and Accion, Philanthropic Association. We deal with about 25,000 poor people. Yes, sorry. So we deal with about 25,000 poor people, meaning that we know them. We know this population. We know who is professional, who is honest, who is uneducated, who is stealing, and things like that. So we have a very small experience of microfinancing. We got a capital between the members of our association, and we have given about 10 people a little amount of money. Our experience was that, first of all, we were not charging them interest. The second is that after 2 years of operation like this, we got back 80% of our money, which is very high. I wouldn't expect it. But we were ready to lose. We like this program, and we believe that in the case of Greece is really something very good. Not only because the banks are not giving any money, not only because these people are not having any hope to step in their own feet, but because this will give them the hope, and we will get them ready to survive in the future for them and their family. But if I understood well, Marie, you have made your research in the legal banking system here. And if I understood well, you said that the legal infrastructure for Greece is not allowing an organization like this to operate. Is that correct?
Well, you cannot do it, the institution, non-banking institution cannot do it by itself, because if it doesn't have the initial capital, which is very high. What is possible, and what we did in France before we changed the banking law, is to work in partnership with the bank. It's a bit complicated, because this means more or less that the bank keeps the back office, and the NGO is in charge of the front office of receiving people, preparing the documents, ensuring recovery if needed, and so on. But this type of approach could be possible before the banking law is changed. I'm convinced that in some time it will be changed.
Then it comes to my second question, which is referred to all the panelists. Would it be possible that a Greek NGO could work as an affiliate of your organizations? Meaning to give microfinancing credit to Greek people or to people living in Greece under your terms, but the agency, let's say, to be a Greek organization? No, finish.
This I'm not sure. We have to check it. It's a legal problem.
In our case, ONCE Foundation scope is Spain, so the beneficiaries have to be always people with disabilities in Spain, so I'm afraid we could not reach this agreement, sorry.
There are obviously more questions. I think I've been given the sign that to wrap it up. I would actually, if there are questions remaining, I'm sure my panelists would welcome the opportunity to address you one-on-one. Again, thank you for your participation. I hope you learned as much as I did, and enjoy the rest of the conference.